What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you my top 10 surprise teams of the 2024 college football season. So before we pretty much start the postseason, and it's a long postseason this year. We got the college football playoff, 12-team playoff this year, and then we got pretty much a long postseason of play of this 2024 season. So since those are coming up pretty soon, I'm going to go ahead and give you my top 10 surprise teams of 2024. 10 teams that really just came out of nowhere and delivered, some huge surprises, not really, based off of the record and everything. This is going to be based off of my preseason expectations for all these 10 teams. 10 of these teams, some of them I didn't really have high expectations for heading into 2024 just because of the roster and mainly because of their schedule as well. Some of these teams, though, I did have them going maybe 6 and, or actually getting to a bowl game this year, but I did not expect them to probably win maybe more than 7 games. So that's how this video is going to work here. We're going to do the top 10 surprise teams for today, and then tomorrow I'll have my top 10 disappointing teams 2024. So stay tuned for that video coming out tomorrow. But we'll start from the bottom and work our way to the top. So we're going to count it down from number 10 and then work our way up to number 1. So let's go ahead and get right into this top 10 list of surprise teams of 2024. And we start here with number 10. That is the Baylor Bears. Baylor comes in at number 10 on this list. Baylor was 3-9 last year. This year they turn things around and go 8-4. So yeah, definitely a very big surprise team for sure here in the Big 12 for Baylor. Baylor is a team that I was not really expecting to make it to a bowl game this year. Their schedule was pretty tough in the Big 12. They had that non-conference game against Utah that was not counted as a Big 12 game. Utah beat Baylor by a close margin, but Utah ended up being, disappointing. Baylor obviously ended up having a good year the rest of the way, and then Utah ended up being like a disappointment. Utah did not even make it to a bowl game this year. So yeah, it was a great turnaround for Baylor. Can they keep this up, heading into next year and kind of get back to where they were 3 years ago? Remember, this is a team that won the Big 12 championship 3 years ago. So can Baylor get back to where they used to be in the Big 12 as a Big 12 championship contender? We'll wait and see, but, it's next year. But, Baylor has to play a bowl game, so they have a chance to probably win 9 games. But if they lose, they'll probably go 8-5. It's still a pretty solid season for Baylor, turning things around after going 3-9 last year in 2023. Moving on to number 9, we got Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, same record as last year, going 7-5. In 2024, just like they did in 2023. So you're probably wondering, why are they on this list? Well, the way they competed against some of the top teams on their schedule, Miami, for example, they ended up beating Miami. That was probably the biggest win that they had on the schedule. They ended up not competing against Notre Dame. They had to play Georgia and Notre Dame both in the non-conference. And then you had a pretty tough ACC conference schedule with Miami on the schedule. Obviously that was probably their toughest game, but they ended up winning that game. But look at what they did against Georgia. They ended up going 8 overtimes in that game. Had a chance to win that game at the very last second, of course, with back-and-forth 2-point conversions. But yeah, Georgia Tech ended up coming just short, and it's also the balance of this team. The offense and defense were both pretty balanced on both sides of the football, and Haynes King was so impressive this year. Haynes King, probably one of the best underrated quarterbacks in the ACC, in my opinion. I know you got other quarterbacks out there in the ACC that were very good, better than him. You had, Cam Ward, and, also you had, Kay Klubnik this year, but in my opinion, I think Haynes King was definitely the most underrated quarterback this year, especially in this conference and probably definitely in the country. So yeah, Georgia Tech, I know they had the same record, as last year, but, number 9 here on this list just because of how competitive they were. And then also they beat Miami. That's pretty much the reason why they're on the list as well. And I didn't really have high expectations for Georgia Tech. You go back to my prediction, I predicted this team to go 4-8. I know that sounds crazy because of their schedule being tough, though. That's mainly the reason why I had Georgia Tech taking a very big step back of a year after going 7-6 last year. But they're number 9 here on this list. Georgia Tech. Let's now move on to number 8, South Carolina. South Carolina comes in at number 8. They go 9-3 this year. Last year they were 5-7. Did not even make it to a bowl game. So I didn't really think South Carolina was going to be that good this year, to be honest, but they ended up being very, very good. Their record obviously doesn't really matter. They did go 9-3, but their schedule was very tough. That's the reason why they're on this list. You look at the offensive side of the football, that's one concern that I had for South Carolina coming into this year. But, Lenore Sellers just came in there and played absolutely good at quarterback. He can run the football with his legs. And, yeah, South Carolina's offense becomes pretty dangerous when he's running the football. And then you look at the defense. That was probably the strength of this team. Yeah, South Carolina's defense was very unstoppable. And you look at that, schedule. They had to play some of the top teams in the SEC. Like, for example, they had to play Ole Miss, which they were not very competitive. I would say that's probably the only game against, like, a top contender in the SEC that they were not competitive in. But they ended up almost beating LSU and Alabama. South Carolina, if they would have probably won those two games, this team likely could have been 11-1 with that one loss, just coming, to Ole Miss. But they got a big win against Clemson in Death Valley for the second time in a row under Shane Beamer. So South Carolina is probably back in the right direction after taking a big step back from where they were a couple years ago. Last year they go 5-7. This year they have an even more better season compared to a couple years ago. They go 9-3. And again, this South Carolina team was just really competitive in all their games this year. And, the North Sellers just really delivered for South Carolina this year. That's really the main reason why they're on this list as well. So South Carolina at number 8, moving on to number 7. We stay in the SEC, and that's Florida. Florida comes in at number 7. Last year, Florida was 5-7. This year, they go 7-5. And it doesn't really surprise me that much. I had this team going 7-5 in my preseason prediction, but I did not expect them, to really be competitive in some of the games that they, thought they could win against. LSU and Ole Miss were obviously their biggest wins on the schedule. But they were also very competitive against their other teams in the SEC. Like, they were right there with Georgia for a while, in the fourth quarter and everything until DJ Lagway got hurt. DJ Lagway is pretty much why, Florida is on this list. Obviously with a tough schedule this year, having a very tough non-conference schedule, having to play Miami, UCF, and Florida State. All those teams in the non-conference. This team, after the Miami game, I thought Florida was not going to be very good. Even with Graham Mertz at quarterback, I just feel like this team was going to just fall off and Billy Napier would get fired. But they did the opposite of that. DJ Lagway comes in after Graham Mertz got injured in the Miami game, and he delivered right away for this Florida team. And then also, Graham Mertz got really injured in the Tennessee game. They were also very competitive in that game, lost in overtime. If they probably would have won that game, Florida probably would have been 8-4, but if they would have beaten probably, Georgia, this team probably could have been 9-3. But going 7-5 in Billy Napier's hot seat era here, that's a really good accomplishment with a tough schedule, one of the toughest schedules in the country. And Florida, after going 5-7 last year, is this program back on the rise in the SEC? We'll have to find out and wait and see. And then obviously they got their bowl game coming up, so a pretty good chance for Billy Napier to get 8 wins in his third year here at Florida. So that's Florida here on number 7 here on this list. Moving on to number 6, we got the Duke Blue Devils. They come in at number 6 on this list. They went 8-5 last year, then 9-3 in 2024. So you're probably thinking, why are the Blue Devils here on this list? Well, obviously Mike Elko went to Texas A&M. I did not have any high expectations for Duke this year. A new roster, a young team, and obviously some players transferring out. Riley Leonard being gone at quarterback, there was obviously some concerns about this Duke team, and I obviously did predict Duke to, be the worst team in the ACC this year, but it was obviously the opposite of that. Manny Diaz comes in, first-year head coach, not a lot of experience on the offensive side of the football. He's mainly a defensive guy. And he just went out there and did a great job for this Duke team. So it looks like Duke did not miss Mike Elko a lot this year. This was definitely a better season compared to last year and Mike Elko's final year at Duke. So yeah, Duke's got a chance to get to 10 wins if they win their bowl game this upcoming bowl season. So what a great year for the Blue Devils. Again, I really predicted this team to be the worst team in the conference, and that obviously was the opposite of that. Duke goes 9-3 in 2024 after going 8-5 last year in Mike Elko's first year. Manny Diaz did a really fantastic job here for this Duke team. So the Blue Devils here at number 6. We now move on to the top 5. And in my opinion, when you see these teams here at the top 5, these are, in my opinion, the most surprise teams more than those like 6 or 10 teams. So we got Illinois here at number 5. Illinois was just 5-7 last year. This year they go 9-3, so they did not make it to a bowl game last year. But this year, it was a much more better season. So compared to Duke, Illinois was a team that I thought was going to be the worst team in the Big Ten this year. Maybe besides Purdue and everything, Illinois and Purdue were definitely two teams that were really close, to probably being that bottom team in the Big Ten. I think it was Purdue that I actually picked to be the bottom team, and then Illinois being like second to last and everything. But Illinois did much better than I did not expect, and everything. This team looks like they were very underrated. You look at that Kansas game, that obviously probably set the tone for Illinois going into the year. They were definitely that surprise team. And then that Nebraska game going into overtime, that was probably, the game right there that Illinois just came out of nowhere, and they were a very big surprise team. And this team is obviously in the college football playoff top 25, and they're also in my top 25. So Illinois, definitely a very big surprise this year in 2024 after missing out on a bowl game last year going 5-7. They're number 5 here on this list, going 9-3 this season. All right, number 4, we go to the Big 12 now. BYU at number 4. This team goes 10-2 in 2024 after last year going 5-7. So what a great year for BYU. BYU had a couple of losses that got them out of the Big 12 championship. The Kansas game obviously was probably one of their worst losses, but the Arizona State game wasn't bad for them. You'll see Arizona State here in just a moment, but yeah, BYU is a team that I was kind of predicting to be the worst team in the Big 12. So just like Duke and Illinois, BYU is the team that I kind of predicted to be the worst team in the Big 12. Maybe not the worst team, maybe like third to last, to be honest, because it was between Arizona State, BYU, and Houston. Those were the 3 teams that I did not really have high expectations for, but BYU just came out of nowhere and really surprised a lot of people, including myself, winning 10 games after missing out on a bowl game last year, going 5-7. So what a great year for the Cougars. BYU at number 4 here on this list. And then number 3, I just talked about him, Arizona State at number 3. This is a team that was 3-9 last year. This year they go 10-2, but 11-2 if you count the Big 12 championship game. They ended up beating Iowa State a couple days ago, 45-19, I believe was the final score in that game. And yeah, Arizona State just came out of nowhere. First year in the Big 12, obviously we didn't really think they were going to be that good, to be honest, according to my prediction. I had this team going 3-9. I just didn't have high expectations for them. I just had a lot of question marks, and I wasn't really studying the Sun Devils that much, but it looks like this team is now becoming the future of the Big 12. Both sides of the football are very well coached, and now this team is playing for a chance to get to a national championship, and they secured that top 4 bye week spot, so they will be playing the winner of Texas or Clemson. So we'll find out and wait to see who they'll play. But yeah, Arizona State, we're talking about mainly being them a surprise team, and they're here at number 3 on this list. They went 3-9 last year, and for a team that to go 3-9 last year and go 10-2, 11-2 if you count the conference championship, and then making the college football playoff, that is a very big accomplishment here for the Sun Devils, as not just as a coaching staff, but also as a program. So Arizona State here at number 3. All right, number 2 is Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt comes in at number 2 as the second most surprised team in all of college football. Vanderbilt was just 2-10 last year. This year they go 6-6, so they're now heading to a bowl game, which, for the first time in like a few years, I think the first time ever since like the 2018 season. I don't really think they made it to a bowl game in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. They have had a lot of rough years over the past few years, but they go 6-6 this year after going 2-10 last year. And what really stood out to me about Vanderbilt was how competitive they were in the SEC. Virginia Tech game, that obviously got off, to a really good start. That was a big upset to start out the season against like a veteran, experienced Virginia Tech team out of the ACC. And then obviously the upset against Alabama. that was probably the biggest upset of the year. So that probably was the biggest upset of the year, in my opinion, in the SEC. So yeah, I think after that Alabama game, Vanderbilt was starting to get a lot of attention. A lot of the people had Vanderbilt as a top 25 team. They were there for quite a while, but they were competitive against Texas and Tennessee. They came up short in both of those games. The Tennessee game kind of got away from them, but Texas, obviously they just lost that game by 3, but they almost, beat LSU as well. So Vanderbilt, that was just it, about this team. They were just very competitive against some of the top teams in the SEC. Now, they did have a few losses down the stretch from the month of October. Even after beating Alabama, they had some tough losses, but at least they were competitive. So this is the right direction now for Vanderbilt. Really don't know yet. I mean, we're going to have to see what they do in their bowl game. Basically, they're just, focused on the future for next year when it comes to these bowl games. But yeah, Vanderbilt here at number 2, but they're not the most surprised team in 2024. They were very close for me, but I got to go with this team as the most surprised team, and that is Indiana. Indiana is the most surprised team in all of college football this year. Indiana going 11-1 after going 3-9 last year, and then 2-10, from a couple of years ago, or actually I think it was 4-8, 3-9, and then 3 years ago it was like 2-10. Indiana goes 11-1. Kirk Zanetti takes over as the head coach. He done just a phenomenal job. And I tell you what, these first-year head coaches and second-year head coaches have done a phenomenal job this year. Arizona State's coach did a phenomenal job. You had also, other coaches like, Duke's head coach, Manny Diaz. And then you had, other coaches out there that just did phenomenal jobs in their first year as a head coach. But Indiana was one of them. Indiana goes 11-1. That one loss coming to just Ohio State. They were not really competitive in that game, but they had a very easy schedule this year. And that's really why I talked about Indiana being the most underrated team in 2024, because of their schedule and because of all the transfers that they had coming over to help out. So what a job Kirk Zanetti did, though, in his first year going 11-1. But they're not done yet. They'll be playing in the college football playoff coming up in a couple more weeks. They'll play the first game of the playoff officially in round 1 against Notre Dame, so an in-state rival there. And the winner of that game does play Georgia in the quarterfinals. So we'll see how competitive Indiana is against a very talented Notre Dame team. And if they come out really competitive, even if they lose the game, not saying they're going to, but Indiana's got a bright future. So Indiana here at number 1, and they are the most surprised team in all of college football in 2024. So those are my top 10 surprise teams of the 2024 college football season. Let me guys know what you think about my top 10 surprise teams. Give me your surprise teams down in the comments below. We'll have my disappointing teams video coming up tomorrow afternoon, so stay tuned for that video. Stay tuned for more sports content videos, though, on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.